Welcome back. You are listening to Nate the Hate on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and ring the notification bell in the upper right-hand corner so you're notified each time a brand new episode goes live on YouTube. And if you'd like to support the channel, we have a Streamlabs link in the description below. Donate any dollar amount, ask a question, and we will answer your question at the end of the episode. Donate $100 or more, and we will dedicate the episode to you. And with that, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Modern Vintage Gamer.
Hello, Nate. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on as always.
Always a pleasure having you. And today we have a special guest joining us. We have Digital Foundry's own John Linneman.
Gentlemen, how's it going? It's good to be here. I definitely do not hate the Nate, but I'm happy to be on Nate the Hate. So otherwise I wouldn't be here. So, we got some fun stuff to talk about though, don't we?
We do, and we had a lot of fun the last time you were on the show, which was Nintendo September Direct, where we had a good laugh about a few games where I just completely destroyed your love for Front Mission, where you had so much hope for Forever Entertainment's release.
Well, we can look at it now that it has actually shipped, and I have played it, and it is in fact disappointing because it has zero style. It's like, how can we make this look the most like a mobile game?
Oh no. So they Forever Entertainment it.
Apologies to mobile developers. Some of you do great work, but you know what I mean.
And that was the show's roast. But yes, we have a very interesting and hopefully educational episode today. And we're going to talk about the Nintendo Switch, quote unquote, Pro, and what happened to it. Did it exist? And I'm going to start this episode by giving a general timeline of events as to how this entire topic was birthed. And it started in 2021, where this channel began to report that there were some rumblings throughout the development industry of Nintendo distributing dev kits for new hardware where it would have 4K support achieved with NVIDIA's DLSS solution. Now, Bloomberg would later report in 2021, that they were hearing the same thing, that Nintendo was preparing brand new hardware with these features. These conversations ramped up in 2021, where Bloomberg continued to report that this was the case, and some of these reports were corroborated by Nikkei out of Japan. But it began to get more interesting as we got closer to the summer months, where Bloomberg was reporting that it appeared that a release was imminent. This ended up being a false trail, and this led to the introduction of the OLED model. This was a case of conflation where developers were working with these new kits that had the 4K DLSS features, as well as suppliers preparing for new hardware. So 1 + 1 = 2. Unfortunately, that was not the proper equation at the time, and this led to a lot of outrage due to the misrepresentation of the information. Later in 2021, Bloomberg doubled down, and they cited that they had 12 developer contacts that had access to this new dev kit, which included 4K DLSS support again. And they also gave a timeline as to when the hardware could be introduced. And in the report, Bloomberg was citing that they were hearing late 2022. About a month later, I was able to independently corroborate that information, but I was giving a slightly different timeline, which was late 2022, early 2023. Now we go into 2022. The year begins with an NVIDIA data breach where information was stolen. In some of the stolen files, there was mention of NVN2, which would be the successor to NVN, which is used for the Switch SoC for NVIDIA's SDK.
Yeah, that's the low-level API, though it does support others as well, including Vulkan.
Yep.
Yes.
OpenGL, Vulkan, NVN are the three that you can use on Switch.
Mm-hmm. Now, in 2022, things continue to get more interesting. And I want to now pivot to my co-host here, who at GDC, which would also be in March of 2022, began to hear some things on his own.
Yeah, that's correct. So last year at GDC in 2022, I did talk to some developers. And I want to be very clear, Nate, when I say this, I never heard the words Switch Pro mentioned because, I mean, what is that, right? Like that's not even anything that has been formulated as far as what that means. But I was told by a few developers at GDC last year that they did have a updated development kit that they were working with. And that's kind of the extent of what I was told. But I kind of assumed, I made the assumption that, they're working on, I'm going to use the word Switch Pro, but they're using Switch in air quotes Pro hardware, because it seemed like it was just a natural kind of evolution of what was going on with the Nintendo Switch. But yes, I did hear that there were people using I'll just call it next gen hardware, next generation hardware, or next whatever hardware that is at GDC last year.
Mm-hmm. And you see, that would also match what I was being told earlier, where my contacts were just saying, we have a new dev kit for a new Switch.
Mm-hmm.
In their opinion, it viewed as though they were seeing it as more of a revision than a successor, but they always would go back to, it depends on how Nintendo wants to put this out. It's up to them how they're going to brand it, but we have a Switch that has more power, it's more powerful and has these features. So they said, could be a Pro, could be a successor. That's for Nintendo to figure out. All we know is we have a new dev kit for new Nintendo hardware that appears to be a Switch.
Right.
And, I would say the Bloomberg reporting also supported that. That's how they were kind of framing, is that we just have a more powerful Switch that we're working with in their reports. Now,
I think that's part of the confusion around this, is that
yes,
maybe I was too loose using Switch Pro as a moniker, and all of us were, because it's at various points. Switch Pro is just such an easy thing to say, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that there was actually a product called Switch Pro, or that the nature of it was cross-gen, or like a mid-console refresh kind of thing. Like that stuff is all kind of unknown, right?
Mm-hmm. And you see, that's the thing. When you look to a PS4 Pro or even an Xbox One X, had those companies decided to position those as their next-gen successors at the time, they could have done so. There was enough of a meaningful leap in terms of hardware performance and even new features like 4K support that those could have been successors had Sony and Microsoft wanted them to be. They chose not to.
But also, when you look at the dates, they were released relatively close to original machines. Like the Pro was 3 years after PS4, right? So if there was a new Switch hardware this year, that's quite a ways. It's like 6 years after launch.
Yeah, that's where the argument would come into, is what makes a Pro, what makes a successor, and shouldn't the Pro have come out years prior if it is truly a mid-gen refresh, as to opposed to a brand new start of a generation, which you could easily get into the debate of, is a Game Boy Color a next-gen successor to the Game Boy, or was it more so a Pro to the Game Boy?
Here we go again, Nate.
That's a topic for a different day.
I've always felt like the Pro, and this is just my interpretation, right? I've always felt like the Pro is, it's that kind of mid-gen refresh, right? So it's still using an X1. Its memory bandwidth has been increased. The amount of memory has been increased. The clocks have been increased. Basically something that's got more oomph to it. You know what I mean? But it's still binary compatible with the entire Switch library. Nothing needs to be, patched or rebuilt or anything like that. And, that's kind of how I kind of felt like a Switch Pro would be in a pretty high level sense. I'm sure there's probably more to it than that, but that was always my kind of thoughts about what a Switch Pro would be.
Yeah, I think it goes back just to like what John was saying earlier, where the terminology was probably just used a little too liberally.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's right. And that's what created a lot of the confusion around it, right? Like, I think it just became generic shorthand for new Switch, right?
Yes.
And it could have been something like that, but it could also just be new hardware altogether, because
Mhm.
consoles do go through this in their development phase, right? Where there are revisions that release Devkit wise that are incomplete, and work can be done on those, and then they're recalled, and then a further iteration is done. It's an iterative process, right?
Mhm. And I think that leads into what happened as 2022 was continuing. So in the summer months of 2022, when I was inquiring about some updates as to is the hardware still on track to release in the window I was told way back in 2021, I was beginning to hear more rumblings that this hardware is no longer scheduled to release, that Nintendo had actually changed plan and that hardware wouldn't be coming out in 2022 or early 2023, that plan had completely been canceled. And at first, when I was hearing it, it surprised me because, as MVG had just mentioned, back at GDC in March, developers were still working with these dev kits. So to go a few months forward and hear, developers are no longer working with these kits, it seemed like a very abrupt face change. But this does happen in the industry, as you're mentioning. This
Mhm.
isn't that uncommon, but for a public view, this may be new information that hardware and dev kits are recalled, hardware is canceled internally. And that seems to be the case of what happened here, is that all prior reporting from my view here was it was accurate at its time.
Yep.
It's just plans
Yeah,
changed.
that's what it seems like.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, look, dev kits have a life of their own in so many ways. I mean, the early dev kits that come out in general are literally just a bunch of motherboards, tied together, in some really weird fashion. Like a dev kit that you kind of see on websites, with photographs and stuff, they're nothing like kind of I'll call them the prototype ones that studios get early on to to kind of proof out the performance and their games and stuff like that. So look, the concept of sending dev kits back and kind of ceasing development for the time being, it's not uncommon. It happens. So I'm not really that surprised about like from what I heard, like I said at GDC, through the end of the year last year, where we kind of discovered that it seems like that development had ceased on this stuff is not really that much of a surprise to me, to be honest.
Mhm. Now, I
Yeah.
want to ask John a quick question,
Sure.
only because a lot of this discussion kind of erupted
Yeah.
through some comments you made on a recent Digital Foundry podcast where you had said, based on some conversations you had, that it was in your opinion that a mid-gen refresh had been canceled and that you're no longer anticipating hardware coming out in 2023. Based on timeline of events and anything that you may have heard on your own, do you believe that this hardware may have been what you were hearing about or what you were referring to?
Yeah. I think everyone here has kind of heard similar things from different places. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And yeah, I think, and the timelines all kind of line up, and it's a tricky thing to talk about, actually. And by
It
saying the
is.
Switch Pro was canceled, it's more like whatever iteration thing had been we heard about, or things that had been reported on, that thing, the thing that Bloomberg reported on as well, I don't think that exists anymore. And I
Mhm.
think I was trying to say people shouldn't expect anything in 2023 based on this stuff. Of
Mhm.
course, none of this is 100% right. We're not getting direct info from anyone here. Well, not official info, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Right. But as far as I can tell, just if I had to guess, we're not going to see anything this year.
Yeah. Do you think though there'd be an announcement this year though?
See, that
Or
that is
potentially
something
2024?
that actually does seem feasible,
Right.
especially if we follow the Switch's timeline. I could absolutely see them doing something this fall, where they roll out some kind of early announcement teaser thing, almost to save the date.
Yeah.
And then perhaps they do another, sort of demo event early in 2024. I could see them releasing, I mean, again, no knowledge here on this, but I could see them releasing something next spring like they did with the original Switch. They seem to have found a good stride there. And I wonder if, obviously Metroid Prime 4 was completely redeveloped, as we know.
Yeah.
And I almost have to wonder if that's a game that could be used as a launch title.
Right.
I mean, it's because Zelda's
doesn't it?
too late, right? Like,
yeah,
Zelda's coming out this year. And maybe that would even get a port or like an enhancement, right? I could see that. But as far as launch stuff is concerned, it feels like Metroid Prime 4 would be a really good fit for that if it's actually ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely going to be, curious when Nintendo officially introduces their next gen or their new hardware, because with this early reporting that we had of dev kits having been distributed, and I want to make clear that this in no way was conflated for the OLED model, because the dev kits for that, which are known as ADEV, did not have these features. It just had more RAM, and those were distributed very close to the actual OLED announcement.
ADEV and SDEV, just the differentiation between the higher end, more fully featured models and the lighter weight ones. I know the SDEV kits are the much thicker Switch units, right?
They were the first ones to come out that had, it was like a steel cage almost, right?
Yeah.
But the ADEV is a dev kit that's based on the OLED model, so it looks exactly like an OLED Switch, but it's a development kit. And the eDev is kind of just a regular Switch dev kit.
That's what I was thinking of. eDev and SDev, right? So the A is the OLED one, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I guess the reason why they brought out the ADEV dev kit, for all intents and purposes, it's almost the same as an eDev. The only real difference is the OLED screen and bigger flash and all that sort of stuff.
I suspect the idea there was just so developers can develop on that unit and see what the game might look like on that screen.
Yep.
Because there are things to consider if you're designing for that.
Of course, yeah. And I know that they added some things that they would test for with regards to things like burn-in and stuff like that. So the reason why I guess they brought the ADEV out was so developers could get an idea of, burn-in implications and stuff like that on the OLED screens. But other than that, it's pretty much the same as the eDev.
Just getting my vowels confused there. I guess we'll have, I don't know, the iDev next.
Could be. eDev for the Pro. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, there was no means of conflation between the ADEV kits and these other dev kits, which had DLSS functionality, as the ADEV kits did not have those features. Because I saw some people speculating that the mid-gen refresh that you had spoken of that, may or was no longer planned, that they believed you were referring to the OLED model, which, as far as I can tell, the OLED model was never planned to be anything more than it was. It came out exactly as it was always intended.
Yeah, I think the OLED model was always its own thing. It was never downgraded to something else.
Right.
And I would also think that the other hardware you're talking about, we should reiterate that calling it a mid-gen refresh, that's just pure speculation, right?
Correct.
It may or may not have been that. And so I think that's some of the confusion. There was just different hardware is what we've heard about.
Yeah, and it was just probably to simplify the conversation around it was just to say, let's call it a Switch Pro. Because when you think, this was being discussed in 2021, 4 years into the Switch life cycle. And if you would have had Bloomberg already reporting that next generation Nintendo hardware dev kits had gone out to developers 4 years into the cycle, you probably would have had people reacting saying, oh no, it has to be a mid-gen refresh. It can't already be a successor. We just started this generation. The Switch is selling so well. Why would Nintendo really be kickstarting their next successor this early on? But now, 6 years into it, it makes more sense to think that Nintendo was already starting their work on a next-gen successor. And this was, pre-pandemic, pre-component shortage, cost rise, war, a lot of external factors that could have had an influence on what ended up happening with this hardware and led to its cancellation. And I naturally have to bring this up because I know it's going to be a question, and it's going to be something listeners are thinking about, is that in the NVIDIA breach, there is a mention of an SoC codenamed Drake. And Drake has ray tracing. It has DLSS. So naturally, it would sound as though the dev kits that we have been discussing up to this point would be equipped with this Drake SoC. But obviously, none of us have firsthand confirmation of what the SoC was in these kits. We could only assume, just as anyone else is assuming up to this point.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, again, I didn't know specifics about what these dev kits had as far as hardware. Again, I kind of assumed that it was still X1, but they had made some performance boosts in specific areas where the Switch kind of struggles, especially around things like memory bandwidth and RAM and stuff like that. But you're quite right, Nate. I mean, it really could be anything at this point. It could have been the new SoC as well.
See, I do wonder if what Nintendo was working with and had distributed with these kits, it had, all the features we discussed, and maybe the SoC simply evolved, became more efficient over time. And that is where Nintendo issues a recall because they're going to distribute better kits, but they also pivoted on the hardware itself. Not necessarily the concept, but just a certain element of it. And that's why it was intended for 2023. And now that's no longer in the game plan, and it will be coming out in, the future, as you were mentioning, just as a hypothetical release window of spring 2024 or even late 2024. And that is what happened. The hardware became better than what was originally projected. And that causes a delay. And because it was never officially announced, internally, there isn't that much turmoil. It's just we're pivoting, and it's going to be a little later than planned, but it's going to be something better.
Yeah, and conceivably, this all just sounds like a normal console cycle. When, like you mentioned before, the rumors were coming out after the Switch was already 4 years old at that point, right? And it takes time to design these machines. So I can see where the confusion over it being a mid-gen refresh thing would have come from, but looking at it now, it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense that whatever that was would just be in a new console, right?
Yeah,
like because they would have been working on something. I think it's fair to say, and yeah, that's typically the sort of rollout time period.
Yeah, and the other thing that I keep thinking about when I think about kits were sent back. And look, the thing that I always go back to is one of the biggest things that the Switch really needs is good battery life. So it is possible to assume that Nintendo did send out kits to studios so they could take a look at this hardware and start getting their head around it, while Nintendo was still trying to figure out, what kind of battery do we need, or what kind of battery life do we need on this new hardware? And maybe, those tests had completed, and they said, okay, we have everything we need. We're getting some metrics from developers about, how long the average game takes, all that sort of stuff. And they said, okay, now we want to move on to phase 2. So send us your kits back and we'll be in touch, type of thing. So, there's so many different scenarios where I could see Nintendo basically saying, look, thank you for working with this stuff. Now send your stuff back and we'll be in touch going forward with whatever's next.
Mhm.
And we can safely say that this sort of thing has happened with other manufacturers in the past.
Absolutely.
So it's not that unusual.
Yeah,
I think really all the hype and excitement around this stuff just simply comes from the fact that people want something new
Yeah.
Mhm.
out of it. They see the state the Switch is in, as far as like porting games is concerned. And it only makes sense that you would want something a little bit more powerful at this
Right.
point. So it's a lot of wishful thinking there, combined with the typical console development business happening in the background. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's almost a weird case of you got good information almost too early.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that begins to hit the news cycle, and the information being reported is accurate. It just unfortunately at the end, and the end is the only thing that matters to people, is that the reporting ends up being inaccurate, but not due to fault in the reporting itself.
Right. When did the first Bloomberg report hit? Do you remember?
I
Again, think
believe
you
it
mentioned
was
that earlier.
first half of 2021.
Yeah, so it's been a while since that one. Yeah.
But there was also some talk, I believe it may have even been in 2020 from Nikkei, where they were hearing that Nintendo had a minor revision and then they were working on something new, but the concept had not yet been finalized. And that sounded like it was
Right.
still a few years off. And I think Bloomberg may have even had an article it may have been 2020 or even 2019, where they were talking about the light, but that there was also going to be something that more hardcore fans would be interested in. And a lot of people weren't really able to, read into what that meant. Was that the Mariko revision that Nintendo just prioritized battery life instead of boosting performance, which, they easily could have done had they chose to? Or was it just a case of, again, they were hearing some talk of something else behind the scenes coming into its own or being planned, and somehow that got mixed up a little too early?
I love
Right.
how mysterious all this sounds. if you're just tuning in, you're like, man, this is some shady stuff here. It's like,
Welcome to gaming.
we'll talk about it on the street corner here, in the back alley.
Yo,
You got that new Nintendo?
yeah. How much you willing to pay for it, though? But yeah, it's definitely, I guess, like my key takeaway in this, and it's not even just for myself, it's so that others can understand the situation in its entirety, is that what was being reported was accurate information for its time. That these kits did exist. New Nintendo hardware was discussed and sent out to partners. And at some point in 2022, Nintendo made the call to recall these dev kits and cancel the intended plan of bringing out that hardware in 2023. And I know people are going to say, well, what does that make of the SoC that we saw leak in the NVIDIA files? It doesn't mean anything changed on that front. The NVN2 SoC, known as Drake, can still be in development at NVIDIA. They can still be testing it, and it could just be repurposed for whatever Nintendo has coming next.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. I mean, NVN 1 runs on a multitude of different NVIDIA cards. Even though it's geared for the Switch, there is libraries that can compile against like Windows if you have the appropriate NVIDIA card, right? So I would expect the same thing with NVN2 in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I think so.
So we naturally have to bring up the discussion of there's no hardware in 2023. What is next for Nintendo? And we've kind of touched on this a slight bit, but do you believe, that Nintendo can feasibly really survive 2023 and let's say the better half of 2024 with the current Switch hardware? Because
Sure.
it's aging. We know it's ceiling now.
I think it's going to be perfectly fine. It's nearly the best-selling console of all time.
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge audience out there. People want to still buy games for their hardware. I think the only problem it really presents is just ports for third parties, because we're now we'll be 3 years out from the new console generation, right? And there are probably projects that third parties have been working on that are now sort of targeting those platforms and maybe still cross-gen, but are perhaps a little bit beyond what would be feasible on the Switch, at least in a way that's pleasant. So that could present a problem for some of them, but I would say that the majority of the audience, the Switch overall audience, the selling point isn't necessarily, can I play the latest AAA game on my Switch? Right? Like, I don't think that's why the Switch is popular right now.
Right.
Like, maybe at the beginning that was a big thing, but now I think it's the strength of Nintendo's own software combined with, the mountains of indie stuff and other types of games that you can find on there that make it pretty appealing. Plus, just the continued library. There's still stuff on there that people are playing and will continue to play. So
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, John, and ask you this. So Bayonetta 3, when it came out, you and I both made videos on its performance, and we were a little disappointed. And I think that's putting it pretty lightly. And I get it. Platinum hasn't had the best record as far as, locking in a 60 FPS frame rate on any of their games. But Bayonetta 3 felt really, really ambitious for the hardware. And it almost makes me feel like they made some sacrifices to, in the final game to get it over the finish line. There's also other games that Nintendo have released, first-party games that performance hasn't been great. And I think about,
wait, which ones?
Well, Age of Calamity is one. Well, I guess that's not a...
See, that's the thing, right? There's Age of Calamity is Koei Tecmo, right?
Right.
And then stuff like Pokemon, that's Game Freak, and they've always been inept at that in that regard. So I actually can't... Can you recall any actual internal Nintendo titles that have had serious issues?
No, not at all, actually. I think you're right. They all run very, very well, But I also wonder, is it going to be this year where we start to see some of the first-party releases start to drop off as well? And I guess we'll have to... I think the big elephant in the room right now, at least, will be Tears of the Kingdom, right? Because and that's the most interesting one for me, because on one hand, it's been so many years since Breath of the Wild, which started its development on the Wii U.
It finished on there too.
finished on there as well. So on one hand, we expect Tears of the Kingdom to be a bit of a leap in terms of visuals and performance, much in the same way as if you take something like Uncharted 1 on the PlayStation 3 and then look at, The Last of Us on the PlayStation 3 or something.
See, it's funny you bring up Tears of the Kingdom, because when you were on your half-year excursion in Australia and missed the entire month of September.
Yep.
When John was on, we were talking about Tears of the Kingdom and how we don't see those generational leaps in visual fidelity that we used to see in prior generations on more modern hardware.
Yeah.
And we kind of wondered, is that just a thing of the past now? Because
I would say yes. And I don't think it's necessarily hardware to blame anymore. It's more that the tools and practices within the industry have become far more advanced at this point.
Right.
You think when Uncharted 1 was made, for Naughty Dog, they had never made a game using even just like programmable shaders and the types of hardware features that the PS3 offered. That was the very first time they've done that. And a lot of the games released that generation, they were just doing tons of new stuff. So developers were basically figuring it out, so to speak, right? Yeah. Best practices had not been established on any of that. And the research and development during that generation was insane. The amount of stuff that was being figured out about lighting and just like the way you handle materials. And, the first PBR game that shipped, I think, was Remember Me, which launched before the consoles, the new or PS4 and Xbox One had hit, right?
Yeah.
And that became a standard thing. So I just feel like now at this point, you can get, given how not too complicated the Switch hardware is, I think developers could get a lot out of it right away.
Yeah.
There's not that much to learn about it. It seems like the biggest technical hurdles all come from converting certain types of rendering techniques over to the Switch, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're doing like a full on deferred render or something, that's really tough in a memory bandwidth constrained environment like the Switch, right? So, things like that were the challenge.
The big thing in video game, well, in rendering tech these days is because you have so much memory on, consoles, you basically load up as many GPU instructions as you can in RAM and then just push it all in one go because you have so much memory bandwidth and you have so much memory. But obviously on the Switch, you don't have that luxury. You have to just keep that pipeline, that really kind of narrow pipeline fed without any type of stalling. And that's a different way to think about things. I mean, it was the way to think about things, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, but now things have changed a lot, so I think that's the biggest issue why Switch ports don't come across very well, especially when you use engine technology, because, it's kind of implying that you're just batching up all these GPU instructions and just pushing them all, and rather than kind of just keeping that pipeline, fed with instructions and moving along.
That's the thing that's always interesting to think about with different hardware platforms and why you can't just like take the Switch and compare it to like an Xbox 360 and, make it a 1-to-1 situation. Cause the 360 is a far more dated GPU than what's in the Switch, but there's other bottlenecks in the Switch that maybe the 360 has a little bit less of, and I think the analogy of calling it literally a pipe, like a pipeline where it's, you need to get one thing to another place, and there's going to be different bottlenecks along the way depending on the platform and how fast you can shove that stuff through the pipe. And depending on where you get hung up, that can cause issues with different types of things that you might be trying to draw. So, and the Switch obviously has plenty of limitations owing that it is a mobile thing that's designed to consume less than like 10 watts or whatever. Which is nuts, by the way, when you look at the power consumption of the more powerful consoles out today versus what the Switch has. The Switch is dated, but I still somehow find that type of hardware running nice looking games at 60 frames per second in many cases to be like just still somehow magical. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's cool. Like when I loaded up Burnout Paradise recently on the original Switch, and you just see a game like that running at 60 FPS on a mobile platform, and I don't know, I think it still looks good. You're like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I don't know. I feel like so one strategy, I've thought about this before, that developers could use with the Switch in this year, probably too late if they haven't already started, but I feel like it's a perfect time to re-explore some of the Xbox 360 and PS3 era games that they might have in their back catalog, like was the case with Burnout, where you could essentially do some sort of like packs or remasters or re-releases, tool them up, get them on Switch, and go from there. And I bet you could sell some pretty decent amount of copies of some of those games because the nostalgia is kicking in for that era, right? So I think people seeing some top 360 style games, like imagine if Activision was just like, what if we did the Black Ops trilogy on Switch right now? Something like that.
They already exist, right, on the Wii and Wii U, don't they?
Well, the Wii game is its own thing, right? It's not actually, but Black Ops 2 was actually on Wii U.
Yep.
Black Ops 3, I could take it or leave it, and 4 is obviously totally different, but even if they just did Black Ops 1 and 2, like as a package, they would make bank on that on the Switch. I'm 100% positive.
Yeah, because I mean, it would really have no competition.
Yeah, exactly.
So you definitely have a large market who would pick up those games, even just for the online multiplayer to play it portably in handheld mode.
People love those games. And I think there's a lot of games that are ripe for that on the current Switch that if they had the foresight to develop them for release in like 2023, You could probably make some bank on those games during the time when cross-platform becomes more difficult, right? Like any studio is
Right.
designing a Series X PS5 game right now. It
Mhm.
still like targeting Xbox One is now the equivalent of targeting Switch, 3 years ago. If you know
Yeah.
what I mean, right? Like
Yes.
it's
Right. Yes.
so yeah.
See, that's going to be the interesting thing, I think, for 2023 and 2024, leading up to when Nintendo does introduce new hardware, is that you're going to see third-party support wane in terms of those big AAA releases, because it's just not practical to target the Switch hardware when you really want to take advantage of all those bells and whistles on the Series X and the PlayStation 5. So that's where you're seeing games like Dead Space Remake, Resident Evil 4 Remake. They're just not possible on the Switch hardware. And I'm sure partners are communicating with Nintendo of, we would love to put these games on your platform, but you need to give us hardware to make this happen. And that's where you really have to wonder, when can Nintendo realistically get hardware that can run these types of games? Because when we look at the leaked SoC and the features it will have, there's going to be really nothing stopping that particular product from getting ports of these games. Because right now, roughly, if you do rough calculations and you have to assume the clock speeds and everything, you could feasibly be getting hardware that is comparable to a PlayStation 4 Pro from Nintendo. And that is more than enough to get downports from the Series X and PS5. But it's almost as though Microsoft did Nintendo a favor in this case with the Series S. If you can get ports of a Series S version without too many compromises, it positions Nintendo in a very advantageous manner where they can then boost the software with DLSS and have hardware that is, very competitive with the PS5 and Series X, if that is something that comes to market.
DLSS is not necessarily magic though, and it also has a computational cost. And
Right.
Series S already has access to things like FSR2 from AMD, right?
Mhm.
Which, arguably not as good, but I would say they're pretty ballpark. You can get pretty great results out of FSR2. So
It comes
I
at a cost,
actually-
and I guess inserting frames into the renderer also introduces input lag, right? Like,
oh yeah, if you're
in
doing
general.
DLSS 3,
yes,
well, so that's actually an interesting one, because if you have let's say you're taking a game from, we'll talk high frame rates, from 60 frames per second up to 120 with DLSS 3.
Mhm.
The DLSS 3 version running at 120 would actually have lower input lag than if you were just running at 60 FPS natively in our testing.
right.
Right? So it's still an improvement. The problem there, I guess, is the problem with DLSS 3 still is that it doesn't work very well if your target frame rate is like 30-ish.
Yeah.
I mean, it works
Yeah.
okay visually, but the input lag, I mean, but then again, if you were going to have a choice between a 30 FPS game or looking like 60 with DLSS 3, and they
Mhm.
both had similar input lag, I guess you would still want the DLSS 3 version, right?
Right. Right.
So the big thing I would like to see, and I don't know that this would necessarily happen, is I really want them to put a VRR screen in that thing. Like,
Wow. I mean,
conceptually, that
yeah.
shouldn't be that difficult or that expensive to support that, right? I have a feeling they would not do that, but man, that would be great, because that could solve so many problems.
I mean, yeah, that would be great. You'd also want the screen to have HDR.
I mean, yes, that would be nice. That would actually potentially raise the price more. But I mean, conceivably, the Switch OLED screen being an OLED screen, I wonder how they could drive that. I mean, that could already support an HDR like experience, maybe at a lower maximum nit level. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because
then again, they're afraid of the burn-in stuff still, right? I mean,
Right.
burn-in
Yes.
is much less of an issue on OLEDs now, but still, if you're pushing really high brightness levels, the risk is greater, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess even if they don't have those features, assuming, that they keep the same concept, that it's a hybrid and all that, hopefully at least they have that support when the unit is docked.
Yeah.
That would at least be beneficial, even if it is only for docked game time.
And it is interesting. We're all talking about this as if it's basically just the Switch again. And I suspect that's probably what it's going to be.
See, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, there's now that, we've moved on from the Switch Pro, the kind of the assumption now it's the Switch 2, right? You know what I'm saying? Like the next generation of Switch. And look, it's probably going to be that, because why would they pivot away from something that's been so successful for them? But you can't rule out this is Nintendo. They always kind of just give us something that's a little bit from left field,
So that's the thing about it, though, is that that was only a specific era of Nintendo, right? Like Nintendo under Yamauchi was different. All of their platforms actually targeted, save for maybe the Game Boy, but the actual home consoles were aiming to deliver high-tech experiences that had significant technical advantages over the competition. And they achieved that with each of their systems, especially the GameCube, I would argue, which is a brilliant piece of engineering. Absolutely amazing machine. It was only under Iwata that, they kind of shifted focus for a while.
Yeah.
And I suspect with the current more conservative leadership in place, I could see them returning to, well, we'll just do the Super Switch. You know what I mean?
You think they're going to play it? I mean, Furukawa's a very, very safe person as far as his...
Exactly. I mean, he's a safe businessman.
Yeah. He bets on sure things, and it works, right? So based on that and how he kind of runs the company, it's a good assumption to think that whatever is next will be a hybrid handheld /system that's probably going to be called something Switch. Like the Switch name will be in there, but
Switch U.
Yeah.
I don't
know what they're going to call it.
You can't call it the Switch U.
The new Nintendo Switch. No, I think the thing here, though, is they've kind of made their bed now, because ever since the original Game Boy, their handheld and console divisions have been split. The development studios have been split between those platforms. They finally consolidated them with Switch. There is no way in heck I could see them wanting to go back to that split model, because that just demands so much more resources from your development teams to keep the pipeline fed, especially given the complexity of modern games, right?
Right.
Like, I think that's why the things seem a little bit dry on the Switch in the last couple of years. I mean, they're still putting out stuff, but it's just they kind of blew their load early, if you will. They had a lot of good stuff in development, and it's strategically aligned with when the Switch launched. So they were able to just get all that stuff out pretty fast. And then those teams all went back to the drawing board, and it's time to build something new, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure now it makes me think, if they have a new console, hopefully in the works for next year, you would imagine that they've been building stuff up in the background. Tears of the Kingdom's hitting Switch, but what else do they got?
Yeah.
What's in store for Mario, that kind of thing.
Right.
So remember, Mario Odyssey showed up kind of right before the Switch launched as like a reveal thing, right? And we haven't seen much else from them that's truly original. I would suspect that the Bowser's Fury add-on that we saw with that 3D World re-release, I wouldn't be surprised if that served as a model for whatever they're doing next, right?
Yeah, you could see them that could have been them experimenting with the idea of a more open world 3D Mario game to see how performance would work, how they could design things, and then gauge the public's reception to it, which was overwhelmingly positive. So that's them probably using the public as, the guinea pigs of, let's see how they go. And Nintendo has done this before. If you go back to even like Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, where they had games like Drill Dozer with a gyro, and then all of a sudden it becomes a standard for the Wii. Nintendo likes to openly experiment with ideas with products, and then they'll design something completely around what was once a gimmick.
Yeah. And we're in a great period right now for this though, because you look back, speculating on this stuff is actually fun, right?
Mhm.
The period before a reveal is actually fun. So let's just take a moment to celebrate the fact that we're here. There's going to be something more. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but it sure
I
is
think
fun
so
to talk
too.
about it.
I think so too, because I mean, look, they have to be thinking, if we do, if it indeed is a Switch 2 or a new Switch, that is a new, a generation leap, then what is the big thing that is going to entice people to migrate, right? And I don't want to talk about backward compatibility because that's another conversation.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is, you have to come out with some big launch titles, and I think they know that, right? Like you mentioned, Mario, John,
Metroid as well.
Metroid, possibly. They have Mario Kart 8 ready to go on that system, so they can sell another 50 million units all over again. But there has to be something. There has to be something with this new model that is going to want people to move to it. Now, people like us, we're going to jump on it immediately because we're tech heads and we love this stuff. But to the average kind of mom and pop that has already bought a Switch for their kids, whatever, and they have a couple of Switches in their household, maybe two of them. What is going to be kind of the deterministic factor that makes them say, "Oh, this is the new Nintendo system, so we need to upgrade to this"? Because I don't think they're going to get into a Wii U situation again, because that was a thing that just happened and will probably never happen again. But I also feel like they must realize that whatever is next, they have to get as many people on board as possible. So how do they do that? And I guess one way to do that is to, again, I'm talking about back and pat, but having that available so people can upgrade and take their library with them. But what do you think, is going to be the X factor that really makes people jump on board with new Nintendo hardware?
That's actually difficult, because fundamentally, what was it about the Switch? I guess it was that it was just a fascinating device and it had really good games.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, right? And it's not rocket science to try to answer it. Like when the Switch was announced, it was a hybrid system. People were a little bit like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting," and from left field. But you're right; they had Mario, they even had Skyrim. Remember? And that was a big thing. So I guess if they have the buy-in from some third parties, and I'm sure they do, plus a strong first-party launch lineup, then that is probably enough for them to get things moving.
The thing I've been wondering about though is like two of their biggest games on Switch, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. What's the future of those series?
Ooh, that's the $1 million question.
Smash, for instance, I kind of feel like Smash is over. I don't think Sakurai has another one in him. And where do you even go from that point? Right. Yeah. And then Mario Kart, I do think you could follow that up with a pretty cool Mario Kart 9. But still, Mario Kart 8 is like the ultimate Mario Kart in many ways. Mm-hmm. So it feels like that's going to be a tough question for them to answer now, is like, how do you evolve that? Also, Splatoon, I would say Splatoon 3 is very good, but they've kind of run its course, right? It is what it is. It's huge in Japan, but like, if can Splatoon 4 just be that again, or do they have to shake it up? Like, I feel like they're right. Same with all the Warriors stuff. They did like the Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U, and then they were able to continue this on the Switch. And there's so many franchises they've been able to continue, but it kind of feels like they're reaching sort of a dead end point. And traditionally, the upgrade was like new graphics. But is that gonna? I don't know. I just don't know what they're gonna do next. Yeah, if it's just more of the same in terms of hardware, right?
Right. It feels as though like they need some new innovations when it comes to game design to some of these iconic franchises, like as you mentioned with Splatoon and Splatoon 3. It feels as though when they go to Splatoon 4, you have to you have to introduce a new gameplay mechanic that is exciting and fresh. Just like when Splatoon came out, it was such a fresh new take on the genre. It was something unlike anything we've ever seen, and now it's just becoming very iterative.
How about this? This would be cool. What if the hub world of Splatoon was directly linked to all matches happening within an instance, and you could like just see matches happening in other scenes that you could then jump directly to? I don't know. Just spitballing here. I'm just imagining what could you do with more hardware power and like just create a more connected, open environment where you actually see things happening around you instead of everything being segmented.
Yeah, if you make it feel like a singular living world.
Imagine like you're playing some single player levels and like they have an instance of multiplayer like running in the skybox below you or something. I don't know, just something silly like that.
I mean, but you see, just
fun to dream.
It is fun to dream. I mean, even like Smash Brothers, as you brought up. I mean, the game is called Smash Brothers Ultimate.
Yeah.
Where do you go beyond that? And you look at all those third-party characters that they license into this project. It's hard to envision them topping that roster. And that's where it feels as though the next iteration almost has to be a reboot. They have to.
Yes, it can't just be more Smash the way it's always been.
Right.
But then you get into a situation where if it's not that, the purists are going to be angry. Like my thought was like, well, I would love to see it transition into full 3D movement with a Z-axis movement, like more Power Stone, but with Smash roster. But I don't think that would fly with the Smash faithful. They would hate that. So I don't think Nintendo would want to do that risk. And then who would even do it? I don't think Sakurai's up for it. And it's maybe, but I'm sure there's other people within that could graduate to that position. But then would they achieve the same kind of, Smash specifically is a really tough cookie, I think. I just don't see how they can keep that franchise going in any way that's new and pulls in the audience. Maybe they would just release Smash Brothers Ultimate again. Like Smash Brothers Ultimate 4K or something. But
yeah, make it live, like a live service game.
Oh, please no.
Hey, that'd be new. But yeah, I mean,
it's not doing that.
Probably not. But that's the thing with like new hardware is you start thinking of the new ideas they can do for games. And even with the Switch, one of the games that people were really curious about how it was going to evolve and change was Pokemon. And we've learned that it has evolved in a gameplay sense.
Which is cool. That type of gameplay is new and different, and they probably couldn't have done that. Well, they could have done on the Wii U, but any prior hardware, no. Any prior portable hardware.
Right.
But yeah, it's pretty technically junky.
Yeah, but you had so many hopes and dreams of, wow, this is going to be the first HD portable Pokemon. We're going to get open world. I mean, I had a friend who was convinced it was going to have visuals that would be comparable to Xenoblade Chronicles X. And I kept telling him
not watch the trailers
before they were announced. He's like, this is what they're going to look. I'm like, no, they're not. I was like, it's going to look like Sun and Moon, but in HD. I was like, think of like a Tales of game. It's going to look like that. He's like, no, it's definitely going to look like X. And then the trailers came out and he's like, yeah, you were right. It's like, I don't know what I was expecting.
Modern Tales games look a lot better than Pokemon, though. Let's be honest. You look at Tales of Arise, it's
it looks great.
That's generational leap over Pokemon.
Yeah. So his dreams were shattered quite quickly there. But hey, maybe on new hardware.
No, don't even say it. Don't say it. It will never happen. This happens every time.
It really does. So let's just spitball some hypothetical release windows that we could see Nintendo really bringing out new hardware. You've kind of mentioned you wouldn't be surprised if we saw something in spring of 2024. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to go a little later where I would say it's probably holiday 2024 or even early 2025. Because it just comes down to... That's also
realistic.
Yeah. Comes down to production and distribution of the dev kits and when they get out there and, all those factors. So I'm thinking more along the lines that we still have a solid, 20 to 23 months of the Switch remaining.
I think that sounds about right to me. That fits for me.
Well, not 20 months, actually, more along the lines of like, yeah, about 20 months. So
Yeah, I think 20 months is about right.
So, do you guys remember when we first heard about like a code name for Switch when it was called the NX? Was that like, I'm seeing articles going back to 2015 referencing NX.
yes,
Which
that's
got me
when
thinking.
Nintendo put that out in a financial report that they were working on a next gen concept known as NX. But we also have to keep in mind that is when the Wii U was already tanked
in the toilet. Oh yeah, that's true. They don't really need to do that strategically right now. Appease investors, right?
Yeah, they don't need to be
I think
like
that's what that was
something
for,
new.
clearly.
Yeah, it was stay with us. We have something new coming. Don't desert us yet. We understand this hardware is terrible and we're going to drop it as soon as we can. Yeah, that was just them calming investors and appeasing them. So they don't have to do anything like that this time around. So I do wonder if they're going to go more of that approach that we saw with the Switch of we're going to reveal this thing 6 months before we launch it.
Yeah.
Which, if it comes out in spring 2024, we could be seeing it by the second half of this year. If it's closer to the second half of 2024, early 2025, we still have a year and a half before we would potentially hear any official communication. But obviously, there will be reports surfacing once again when dev kits are in hands of developers, be it through sites like Nikkei or Bloomberg. There will be information leaking early. And I guess an adverse effect of this 2023 hardware being canceled is that people are going to approach those reports with some hesitation this time because they're going to say, you were wrong about this. Why would you be right about this one? And as we discussed in the first half of the show, the reporting was accurate. It just ended up being inaccurate due to plans changing. And I know that's an excuse that people are going to say, oh, you're just trying to cover for inaccurate information. But as we also covered, hardware is a very difficult, fluid thing in the industry. It is constantly changing. Plans evolve, and hardware is taken back by the console manufacturers. This is not an uncommon practice. It does not make earlier reporting wrong. It's just the nature of the beast.
And this would be the first new console under the current leadership, right?
Yep.
Yes.
They've not done this before. So I'd imagine there is, there's plenty of experienced people with the Nintendo, of course, but I think that also has an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be like another Giga Leak in like 10 years from now, Giga Leak 3 or something. And they're going to uncover this stuff. Like, that there was some hardware, because we with Giga Leak 1, we saw all these weird prototypes and things that they were doing. And I feel like this kind of stuff will eventually surface at some point. There was some type of mid-gen refresh in the works or some type of quote unquote pro model that was being developed. But you're right, Nate. I mean, I think we've all heard things, and I mean, there was so much smoke around this that you couldn't just kind of disregard and say this is incorrect. But I am glad that Nintendo has chosen to move forward and come up with what we believe at least is going to be new next generation hardware, because it is the right move, especially now as we start 2023. They really need to focus on what's next.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be interesting to see if they come up with a new concept or if they're going to continue with the hybrid Switch model. And
what do you guys think is going to be? I think it's going to be a hybrid model, but I'm playing it safe as well. But what do you think is going to happen here?
Go ahead, Nate. You first.
I think it's going to retain elements of a hybrid model where it's still going to have like that portability aspect, but I'm not necessarily expecting a one-to-one match of what the Switch is. I think there is going to be some differentiating factor between the two. And what that's going to be, I couldn't even begin to speculate over. But I'm not expecting a simple Switch 2. I am expecting it to be different in some capacity.
Indeed.
John, what do you got?
I think it's going to be more Switch.
Yeah,
and,
probably.
It's going to be a continuation of what they've been doing, but better, faster, and it's going to be designed to. I mean, I think the big thing here is that they don't want to lose the third-party support they gained, and they need to make something that is still feasible for developers to target if they're doing, modern games like current gen only, right?
Yeah.
And I think, that means it has to be able to support the features of Unreal Engine 5 to some degree. I mean, Unreal Engine 5 exists on Switch as is, but what I mean specifically is it needs to support Nanite, Lumen, virtual shadow maps, all that stuff to some degree. Which that is actually a tall order though, because even on Steam Deck, it's pretty difficult right now in terms of hitting performance, right? So, but I think it's really important that they get that right, because without it, it's not good. They also need to make sure that it does at least support 4K TVs properly. I don't expect native 4K games, and that would be a waste. I'm sure DLSS would make sense given that they're partnering with NVIDIA, presumably. We don't know for sure, but I think we can guess. I'm actually not confident that they'll have hardware ray tracing features though. Whether or not the SoC supports it, that's one thing, but whether they allow it.
Right. I think it's something that they've been playing around with, like in the lab. But as far as final hardware goes, I'm not sure if it's gonna be in there.
It's such a battery drain. It would be, right? It's a power sucker. And there's no chance it would be, well, I mean, it is NVIDIA, but I'm thinking it wouldn't be able to compete with the actual modern consoles right now, right? And those are already, while they can do decent ray tracing in the right hands, they're not exactly super performant in that regard. RDNA 2 is not excellent at ray tracing. It's a bit slow. So, but then again, NVIDIA pushes this stuff. Not that I would expect them to actually have like a dedicated RT core on this SoC. That would be nuts. Right? Like they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing with it by going like the hybrid model is, are we going to have certain features dedicated only when it's docked? So let's say it has a limited form of ray tracing, but it's only while docked. So in handheld mode, it's disabled. I
really think Nintendo is opposed to that kind of stuff. Like, I don't think they want to have different versions based on where you're playing.
Developers don't want that.
No, exactly. They don't want that either.
Right. Yeah.
That would just be a huge pain.
Yeah. Like, we have to disable all these features because.
But even going back, again, different Nintendo, but talking to folks that worked on the Game Boy Advance, some of them wanted to do different color modes to fit whether you were on a non-backlit Game Boy Advance, backlit or sidelit model, right? And even that Nintendo would not allow in most cases. Nope, we don't want that. It's one system. So
it's
there's
that's the thing. There's a lot of uncertainty and possibility that Nintendo could go with this. Like NVIDIA is more than capable of providing top of the line technology for them, but if it doesn't fit the vision that Nintendo has for the hardware and the type of concept they're going with the hardware, that is what is the determining factor in what we end up getting. So if the hardware is weak, it's not because NVIDIA couldn't provide, it's because of the specifications that Nintendo had in mind regarding battery life, performance, features, that laundry list of reasons. But it's exciting times ahead. And I think this episode was enlightening and educational as to what happened to this long discussed Nintendo hardware. We've given a timeline of what was happening and what may have happened to cause Nintendo to change plan. And this was by no means an episode to give excuses. This was an episode to explain everything we knew over the last couple of years, corroborate the information through multitude of sources of all of our own, and present the conclusion that we've come to of there will be no hardware in 2023. This hardware existed. It just will not come to market.
And if they really pulled off that whole mid-gen refresh thing, I'm just curious how well it would have gone because, different times and all that, but they tried this with the DSi. They tried this with the new 3DS.
Yeah.
It didn't go well, I would say. Those are nice improvements to the hardware, but in terms of actually making use of like the better hardware in the new 3DS, for instance, barely anything touched it.
Right.
Which is a shame because it's pretty capable.
Yeah, it was never really fully utilized.
It only becomes utilized when you use homebrew.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can overclock that bad boy for everything. But okay, that's probably enough of that stuff, right?
That's another episode topic one day. Well, with that, we can go into some of the Streamlabs questions for the week. And our first one comes from South Coast Horizon, who donated $2. And they write, in my opinion, what's the best GTA game? What's your favorite GTA protagonist? Been doing a deep dive on the series, and you can see the ambition progress through game to game up to GTA Online. It's a shame Rockstar stopped development of newer games. High ambitions.
What do you guys got? I have one, but I want to hear what you guys have.
Probably Vice City.
I'm a big fan of Nico Bellic from GTA 4, personally.
Well, yeah, he was pretty good.
I liked him.
I mean, it's hard to deny the best protagonist is probably the guy from Grand Theft Auto London in 1969, but might have to go with some. Dang it. Yeah, I did like Nico Bellic. That was a cool take on that. That was a good time. I think I did enjoy that. That was the game has its faults for sure, but I think it's underappreciated for what it delivered.
And yeah, I didn't really like GTA 4.
No, I can understand. But I think it's a neat game that was really ambitious. And I will forever love it for its initial reveal trailer.
Didn't like getting spammed with phone calls asking to go play tennis, go bowling.
So that's one of the flaws.
One of them. But I mean, from the early rumors we have on GTA 6, it's sounding very ambitious. It's sounding as though with the protagonist, it's going a new path. So I am very excited about what they're going to do with that game.
If it was anything less than super ambitious, I would be disappointed because they've made so much money on that darn GTA 5. Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, how many
investing the heck out of this?
How many copies has that sold now? Like 125 million?
It sold more than most consoles.
Yeah. Then had a question from Jackie G, who donated $1, and they write, as of this moment, who do you personally believe has the most appealing lineup of new releases for 2023 out of the big three?
As of this moment, I'm going to have to say Xbox.
I would agree.
As of this moment, as of January the 17th.
I would say Microsoft, because you have Forza, Redfall, Starfield, compared to Sony, which at this point has Horizon expansion and Spider-Man 2, and Nintendo is sitting there with Fire Emblem, Tears of the Kingdom, and potentially Pikmin 4. I'd have to give the nod to Microsoft.
Yeah, I feel like as of January this year, Microsoft definitely has the best lineup in terms of the most potential games to release.
However, that is only a state of play or a Nintendo Direct away, and we've changed our minds.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But I feel like the thing here, though, is especially Sony released a lot of games last year. Nintendo released some. Microsoft basically released nothing.
Right.
Yep.
This stuff has been building up to release. And 2023 has some big games confirmed. And I would hope that there's still stuff that will hopefully maybe get a date late this year. We'll see. I'm still wondering what's up with Hellblade 2, given that it was like the first game reveal for this new generation. My guess is that, they've just simply upped the scale significantly, which kind of goes against how the original game was designed to be created, which was like AAA on a budget at a smaller scale. I think they're probably just going full on AAA this time.
It seems like it. Plus, don't forget they engine swapped it to UE5 from 4, which I would think the amount of technical debt that they had to figure out there would be significant. So I can see why it's taken them so long. But I also expect that Hellblade 2 will get a date in the second half of this year.
I hope so.
Yeah, we'll see.
It's going to be a showpiece, though, I think.
Yeah,
I think this is the first year where... This is also the first year where Microsoft has a bunch of stuff that's only for the new consoles and PC. Like they're finally dropping the boat anchor.
The VCR is dead.
One, it's dead. It needs to be. That's great.
I love that.
Starfield was already struggling in those trailers, so I cannot imagine how that would look and run on an Xbox One, which I'm sure it was in development for at one point.
They'll come for you, John, if you say that. Good
Lord, dude.
They'll come for you.
Yeah.
Come on now.
I think Microsoft wants to position Hellblade 2 as kind of their answer to God of War Ragnarok. So I'm expecting big things from it.
It's their take on a Sony cinematic game.
Yeah.
Which Xbox doesn't actually have much of and never really has, right? The closest thing they've had to that is Gears.
Yeah.
That's still kind of its own thing. Hellblade 2 is definitely looks like it's going to be one of those cinematic experiences. So, which is great. I'm glad they got one.
Looking forward to it. Hopefully we see it in June and gets a release date by then. Then had a $4.07 donation from Terrence. And they write, "It's great to hear you again in 2023, and I'm wishing all the best for you." Thank you. Do you think the Super Mario movie's reception after release will entice Nintendo to add voice acting in the next 3D Mario game? Jack Black as Bowser in Galaxy 3 would be awesome.
No,
I don't think so.
It's going to continue to be, at least for Charles Martinet clips, and then inevitably it'll become AI versions, generated versions based on Charles Martinet's work.
Oh no.
The dark future is here.
Breaking out Chat GPT. Yep.
Then had a $1 donation from Enix93. Writes, "Hope you are doing well, Nate and MVG. So I have 3 questions, if it's okay. Question 1. Is there any new info on GameCube coming to NSO this year?" There is not. It was something I was hearing whispers of last year, but nothing really substantial enough that I considered to be credible enough to validate the information. It would be a nice addition if it were ever to happen, but nothing to suggest it will.
And I've said this before, but I feel like GameCube, I mean, we already know a GameCube emulator exists because Nerd has developed one. I mean, that's exactly. Sunshine is obviously a thing. There are other GameCube ports as well. I don't think that GameCube on the NSO service is something that's going to happen. I think we're just going to see specific versions of GameCube releases brought forward. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whether they're emulated or remasters or whatever they are, I couldn't say, but that's kind of
realistically what's left.
Yeah, exactly.
What's left?
Exactly.
At least the stuff that, maybe they could work out some third-party deals, but I feel like there's not enough there on the GameCube. I mean,
there's obviously things like Eternal Darkness and stuff that they could consider.
I don't think they'd ever touch it again.
But yeah, there's a part of me that feels like that's more of a hopes and wishes thing than anything else.
I mean, there's a lot of great stuff on the GameCube, but it's either already been kind of re-released elsewhere, or it's the kind of game that they probably wouldn't touch in that capacity. Like, love it or hate it, I would love to see Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes re-released and improved, because
I'd like to see
it has performance issues. That would be cool. I would love to see that. But things like Mario Kart and Smash Brothers, people would probably enjoy that. But they have Mario Kart 8 and Smash Brothers Ultimate, which is kind of competing with it in a way. And they could do Luigi's Mansion, but they already, they put that on 3DS. I don't think they would re-release it again like that.
Right.
There's all those rumors about Metroid Prime HD, so that would probably be its own standalone thing. The Pikmin games, Baten Kaitos, That would be nice. Billy and the Giant Egg.
Billy Hatcher? Yeah.
Billy Hatcher, yeah.
I'll take that.
Giant Egg, Billy Hatcher's Adventure.
Hey, if I can get Beautiful Joe in HD or even on a virtual console NSO type solution, I would take Beautiful Joe.
Super Monkey Ball got that re-release.
Yes.
So there's just a lot of stuff that's either been re-released in different forms or just doesn't warrant firing up the service for it. I mean, I would love to see Skies of Arcadia Legends on there. But again, would we? No, probably not.
No,
Paper Mario
Stego.
1000-Year Door, that would be a great one to put on there. That's probably one of the best candidates, but again, I just don't see it happening.
See, like with Paper Mario 1000-Year Door, I almost feel as though Nintendo is aware of its pedigree, its legend. So if they wanted to bring it to Switch, it would just be a $60 HD remaster.
It would be its own thing for sure.
Yeah.
And then question 2 is, could Zelda Wind Waker Twilight Princess launch in 2023 despite Tears of the Kingdom? I would go into this year expecting only Tears of the Kingdom.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's one Zelda game, and it's Tears of the Kingdom.
That just doesn't make sense strategically. Whether they had that ready to go or not, this is not the year for it.
Right.
And then question 3 is, do you believe the reports that there is no major title left in 2023? Major title is really up to your own interpretation of what you quantify as a major game. If Pikmin 4 is a major release to you, then no, there's still major releases to come. If Metroid Prime Remaster is a big release to you, there's still big games to come. It's all up to what you consider a big release. That comment was more made to mean there's no new Splatoon game. There's no new Zelda game beyond Tears of the Kingdom as terms of big releases. So Nintendo's top of the shelf type releases. There'll still be plenty of quality games. And if the IP is important to you, then there's still big releases to come.
You said it.
And that was the final Streamlabs question for this week. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a Streamlabs in our description below. Donate any dollar amount, ask a question. We will answer it at the end of the episode. Donate $100 or more. We will dedicate the episode to you. And with that, I'd like to thank John for joining us this episode.
Anytime. I'm always happy to join you guys.
It's always a pleasure having you here and talking with you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank MVG for joining me as always.
Thanks as always, Nate. And John, it's always great to chat with you. Thanks for being our guest today.
Most definitely. Of course. It's awesome.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give the video a like. If you didn't, give it a dislike. Let us know your thoughts on today's episode in the comments section below. And until next time, continue to embrace the hate.